guys, it's me, Kanika, and today I'm going to be reading a single short, chapter 3. This is the third video of my series, so make sure you check out chapter 1 and chapter 2 if you haven't. Let's get started. Treaty trotted up the road towards Min's house, but he slowed a little when he heard the potter scolding him even before he arrived. What kind of useless boy was he, coming back so late the day before and leaving the cart without a word? That wood should have been taken to the kiln and unloaded. Min had done it himself at dusk and had nearly injured himself stumbling home in the darkness. Such help was worse than no help at all. Now, did Tree really intend to make himself useful? If not, it would be better for him to forget their whole arrangement. Finally, Min paused to draw breath. Tree dared not look up. He felt like a beast with two heads, one ashamed, the other resentful. Ashamed that he had not finished the work properly, resentful that Min had not given him complete instructions. Build a cart. That had been the order, and he had done it. What had he expected to read Min's mind as well? But the same went out in Tree. He feared being sent away before he could learn to make a pot. I am sorry that I was displeased the honorable Potter, Tree said. If he would be as good as to give me another chance, he would not be disappointed. Min turned and walked towards the side of the house. Tree stood still for a moment, unsure of what to do. Well? Min turned back impatiently. Are you coming, beggar boy? Are you a statue with your feet frozen to the ground? Tree's joy at being forgiven was like a wisp of smoke. Min's orders for the day blew it into nothingness. His task was the same as the previous day, to fill the cart with wood and this time unload it in the kiln site. Each day, Tree appeared at the Min's door eagerly. Each day, Min sent him up the mountain with the cart to chop more wood. At night, with Crane Man's careful ministrations, the wound on Tree's hand would begin to heal. The tender pink layer toughening slightly, but at the start of next day's work, it would split and bleed again. Tree came to expect the pain. The throbbing was like an unwelcome companion who appeared daily after the first few strokes of the axe. On the third day, Crane had offered to come with him. Tree's mind raced to think of a polite refusal. He knew what would happen. Crane would want to spare Tree's blister's hand and would take up the axe himself. Tree shuddered, picturing Crane trying to chop wood while leaning on his crutch. He might well injure his good luck. Your offer of help is kindness itself, Tree answered, but if it is all the same to you, it is far better for me to return to a meal already prepared. I could not imagine greater assistance than this. Crane was satisfied. It seemed to Tree his friend spent the entire day figuring out how to transform a handful of weeds and bones into something that resembled a meal. Over the days, Tree developed a routine of work and rest, a period of diligent chopping and loading, then a break. This was better than several hours of frenzied chopping and left him with a vast and tidy pile of wood, which took much more time to load and left him exhausted. In the brief periods of rest, he was sometimes able to gather a little food. A few wild mushrooms here, a handful of fern sprouts there. Crane had taught him well on their many walks through these mountains together. Tree knew which mushrooms were tasty and which deadly. He knew the birds by their songs and how a mountain lion's boar looked different than from that of a deer. And he had never lost his way, for he knew where the streams ran, pointing sure as an arrow back down the mountains towards the road. Beside his quiet time reading in the mountain, Tree's favorite part of the day was unloading the wood at the kiln site. The kiln was located at the far end of the town from Min's house. Nearby was a large, roughly built shed. Tree wheeled the cart to the shed's entry, then carried an armful of wood inside where it would stay dry. The wood was stacked as high as a man could reach. in orderly piles on either side of a central aisle. Tree Ear liked arranging his wood neatly so the potters could take what they needed without the whole stack collapsing. At the kiln site, he often saw potters whose it was to use the kiln. They would greet him with a nod when he arrived. On the fourth day, one of them spoke to him. "You are Min's new boy, are you not?" Tree Ear knew the potter who spoke. His name was King. He was old enough for gray to streak his hair, but younger than Min. With a keen eye and restless manner, Tree Ear lowered the handles of the cart to the ground and bowed his head. "High time the old man got himself some help." King spoke with what seemed like an edge to his voice. "The last few times he did not bring anywhere near this proper share of wood." Then King stepped forward and began to help unload the cart so Tree Ear's work was finished earlier than usual. He was left with time enough to riffle through a rubbish dump on his way home. The cabbage core that he found would add to Crane Man's culinary efforts for dinner. It was the morning of the 10th day. The evening before, Tree Ear had returned the cart to its usual spot next to Min's house and had lingered about for a few moments. But Min did not emerge from that house. Tree Ear had departed at last. His depth of work paid in full. Awake for much of the night, Tree Ear had considered over and over how best to approach Min. In the 9 days of work, Tree Ear had not once touched clay. He would never be able to make a pot unless he could continue his relationship with the potter. Tree Ear rehearsed his words one last time as he neared Min's house. He drew in a breath and held it for a moment to steady him, and then called out, "Master Potter?" To Tree Ear's surprise, Min's wife opened the door. He knew, of course, that Min was married. On the days that he had spied on Min, Tree Ear had occasionally glimpsed that wife coming out to the yard to scatter grain for chickens or to fetch water. Because she had nothing to do with the pottery work, Tree Ear had ignored her, and in the past several days of woodcutting he had not seen her or thought of her at all. Now he bowed his head as he stood before her. "Is the master home?" he asked. "He is at his breakfast," she answered. "You may wait at the back of the house." Tree Ear nodded his thanks and stepped away, but the woman spoke again quietly. "A good thing you're chopping the wood. He is not as young as he once was." Her voice trailed off. Tree Ear glanced up at her, and their eyes met. Hers were bright and soft, set in a small face nested with fine wrinkles. He dropped his gaze at once, not wishing to be considered impolite. Like Crane Man's eyes, he thought, and wondered why. Min was washing his hands in a basin under the eaves when Tree Ear reached the backyard. "What are you doing here?" Min's voice was cross, and he did not look up. "It has been 10 days, and your debt is discharged. If you came to hear me say it, you can go now." "I beg the honorable potter to pardon my insolence," he said. "I wish to express my gratitude." Yes, Min said impatiently. "What is it?" "It would be a great honor for me to continue working for the potter." Tree Ear began the speech he had planned so carefully. "If he would consider—" "I cannot pay you." Min's interruption could hardly be more abrupt, but the curt words specked over Tree Ear like coaling over a parched field. "I cannot pay you" was the same as "yes." A surge of joy lifted Tree Ear's earnest throat, so that he had to cough politely before speaking again. "To work for such a master is payment enough," he murmured. "Tumble bell until sundown every day," said Min. Tree Ear found himself on the ground, collapsed into a bowl of gratitude. It was all he could do to keep himself from running all the way back to the bridge to tell the good news. "Play today, not wood." Those were Min's order for the 10th day. Once again, Tree Ear trundled the cart, this time along the river road, until he reached the digging area. Here the clay had been cut away in neat slabs, leaving a pattern of staggered rectangles in the river bank. Tree Ear paused for a moment when he reached the clay pits. He had passed by the pits many times before and always liked looking at the scene there. The geometric pattern of the clay blank pleased him. But today he felt as though he were seeing the men and boys working there for the first time. Using spades, they splashed down at the clay with movements almost too swift to follow. When a slab of clay had been outlined with a spade, it was cut away from the bank and heaved into a nearby cart or basket. Tree Ear watched for a while. The spade man had given him on his shoulder. Then he slid down the muddy bank to stand in the shallow water. Raising the spade high over his shoulder, he brought it down with a dull thunk. It sliced into the wet clay, and Tree Ear noted with satisfaction the clean line made by the spade's edge. He tugged at the spade's handle, ready to make his next cut. The spade did not budge. Tree Ear frowned and pulled again. The head of the spade was well and truly buried. Tree Ear tried using both hands down on the handle. The clay made squelching, sucking noises, as if it were trying to swallow the spade. Finally, Tree Ear was forced to claw away the clay around the spade head in order to free it. His arms and his legs were already covered in mud. He paused to brush away a mosquito and rubbed a swash of mud across one side of his face. At last he stood up and swung the spade again. It took him all morning to fill the cart with clay. The other diggers were long gone, having cut their clay with a swift skill that left Tree Ear alone in despair. Heavy! The wet clay was far heavier than he had ever imagined. He could not begin to lift a slab with the spade. He had to cut each slab into several pieces, then lift them one at a time into the cart. Tree Ear scowled to see the misshapen masses of clay in his cart, so different from the rhythmic tingles of the other workers. Moreover, the spade work had torn open his blistered hand again, but it was not so painful as it had been on the mountainside, for here he could apply handfuls of cooling mud, soothing mud to the wound. By the time the cart was loaded, Tree Ear wore mud like a second skin. Even raising his eyebrows was difficult, for his forehead was stiff with dried clay, and he was so exhausted that he could hardly bear the thought of wheeling the now heavy clay back to Min's house. Then a sudden thought came to him. Dinner! He had forgotten the toil of the morning. Apprentices, assistants, the losers, Regan, and every trade, no matter what their status, it was the master's duty to provide a meal for them in the middle of the working day. Now that Tree Ear was no longer working off a debt, Min was obliged to feed him. The thought broke through Tree Ear's fatigue like a shaft of sunlight piercing a cloud. He left the cart on the road and bounded into the river. He scrubbed and splashed and ducked under the water completely to get rid of as much grime as he possibly could. It would never do to appear from his first working meal dressed in mud. Min glanced briefly at the clay-filled cart. You were long enough in returning, he said with a snip. I will not be able to do any more work until after my midday meal. He walked into the house, having said nothing about Tree Ear's food. Tree Ear barely had time to wonder before Min's wife arrived in the doorway. She held out a parcel tied up in cloth. Tree Ear trotted to the door, resisting the impulse to snatch the parcel from her. He bowed his head and held out his hands, palm up and together, as was proper when accepting something. Min's wife placed the cloth package in his hand. Eat well, work well, she said. A hot lump rose in Tree Ear's throat. He raised his head and saw in her eyes that she heard his thanks even though she could not speak words. Tree Ear sat on a stone under the Pulvania tree and untied the corners of the cloth. It held a gourd bowl filled with rice, whose whiteness was accented by a few dark shreds of savory dried fish and a little pile of kimchi, pickled cabbage vivid with seasonings of red pepper, green onions, and garlic. A pair of chopsticks was laid neatly across the top of the bowl. Tree Ear picked up the chopsticks and stared for a moment. One of the things he was certain. The feast-day banquets in the palace of the king could never better the modest meal before him, for he had earned it. Tree Ear carted another load of clay for Min that afternoon, then returned to the bridge where Crane Man had stewed some wild mushrooms for their supper. Tree Ear spoke eagerly about his work for that day. It was not until Crane Man rose to gather the supper bowls that Tree Ear noticed something was missing. The crutch. Sure enough, after handing Tree Ear the bowl to wash, Crane Man sat down with his knife and stood against a branch and began to whittle a new crutch. Tree Ear wiped out of the bowls, stacked them neatly onto the rock shelf, and finally asked, "What happened to the old one?" Crane Man paused in his work, then waved his knife impatiently. "Stupidly happened," he answered. "There was a run of flounder today." That was all he said, but Tree Ear heard much more. Although Ch'Ulpa was on the sea, it was a potter's village, not a fishing village. The men and boys seldom took time for their work to fish. Still, they all knew the useful skill of fishing, and the women and girls often gathered shellfish at low tide. A run of flounder meant that a school of the tasty fish had come into the shore far closer than usual. So they even tossed the fish right up on the beach. Such good news sent many scrambling for their bamboo poles. But one had to be amongst the first to run from the village down to the shore. The flounder found their way back to the sea soon enough. The fish flopping about on the sand were scooped up only by the quickest. It had always been Tree Ear who skipped out to the beach at the first word of a flounder run, and he had returned without a fat fish or two for a rare feast. Now he knew without asking that Crane Man had hobbled down to the beach and lurched about sand so treacherous to his crutch, only to come away empty-handed. Crane Man shaved another curl of wood, then held the crutch up to his eyes, squinting to check that its lines were true. "I was angry about not getting any fish," he said as he went to whittling, "so I struck my crutch against a rock. It broke, of course." A little pile of shavings had grown at Crane Man's feet. Tree Ear crouched and stirred the pile with his fingers, too ashamed to look up. In his mind, he saw Crane Man making his slow, painful way back from the beach with only a broken crutch to help him, and no fish for his trouble. How was it that, knowing his noontime meal, Tree Ear had forgotten his friend? He should have saved some food for Crane Man. If it had been the other way around, Crane Man would have never forgotten. Tree Ear swept the shavings into his palms and threw them at the river. Watched the current carry away. He mumbled, "I'm sorry about the flounder." "Ah, friend," Crane Man said, "you must mean I am sorry about your leg, because that is the reason for our fishless supper today. But I think it is a waste for either of us to spend too much time in sorrow over something we cannot change." Crane Man grunted as he stood, then leaned on the new crutch to test it. Satisfied, he nodded at Tree Ear. "Besides, when I leave this world, I will have 2 good legs and no need for such as this." And he tapped the crutch with his free hand. Still across with him, Tree Ear grumbled half under his breath, "Some of us will have 4 good legs." Crane Man batted at him with the new crutch. "What are you saying, impudent boy? That I will be a beast in the next life?" Tree Ear began to protest. "No, not you." Then he stopped and grinned. "Well, maybe," he said, putting his hand on his chin in an attitude of deep thought. "A rabbit, I think. Very quick and clever. Very clever and quick. You had better be quick yourself, flew out in mock anger, brandishing the crutch sword fashion. Tree Ear began hopping around their little den like a rabbit, dodging Crane Man's jaw jabs and swipes, his shame forgotten for a moment as the day ended in laughter. That was it for today. Bye!